This is an opportunity for me to thank all my friends of the Sawyer Seminar and my friends of Temple Sinai and Beth El for coming here today and for welcoming me so warmly in the beautiful city of Pittsburgh. I want to thank Professor Wendy Goldman and Professor Joe Trotter for organizing this wonderful Sawyer Seminar and inviting me to take part in it. So, I'm the privileged postdoc of the Sawyer Seminar, but I have been a Holocaust researcher since I was 8 years old. As I came home from Holocaust Memorial Day in Israel and asked my mother to tell me what had happened to her in the Holocaust, I found her stories rather confusing, as they were not in line with what I have been taught in school. In my mother's Holocaust, there were no Germans, but Romanians, and those who went by trains were not led to their death. Rather, they were the lucky ones whose lives were saved. This led me, to look and want to understand more. On June 22nd, 1941, the Soviet Union was invaded. Am I in the way to the slides? No, okay. The Soviet Union was invaded. Two Romanian armies joined the German forces, and Ion Antonescu himself, dictator of Romania and an ally of Nazi Germany, headed the advance on the Ukrainian front. Before fighting had even ended, special forces of the Ministry of Interior, assisted by the Gendarmerie and Romanian military forces, began expelling Jews from Romanian provinces, Bessarabia and North Bukovina. There were hardly no Germans involved in these actions, and Romanians executed their own Holocaust in their own way. These Jews were sent to a territory called Transnistria, which literally means beyond the river Nistru, the Dniester. A total of 195,000 Jews were deported to Transnistria. Only 55,000 returned to Romania at the end of the war. Matatias Karp, a historian who lived in Bucharest, Romania through the Holocaust, described the work of the Jewish committees in the ghettos of the Mogilev district in Transnistria. A small group of people, sometimes one single person, were capable of creating a community from the mass of uprooted, exhausted, suffering, and persecuted people. Through initiative, courage, strong will, stamina, and the power of respect, as well as Jewish solidarity. Is this an accurate description or an idealization of the brutal reality? The conduct of the Romanian authorities in the Mogilev district, you can see it here up top in yellow, that's north and west in Ukraine. The conduct of the Romanian authorities in the Mogilev district created unique circumstances for the Jewish committees, a reality that does not always coincide with the common historiographic perception regarding the Jewish councils in the ghettos of Poland. This variance is due to the fact that the Jewish committees of the Mogilev district, unlike the Polish councils, were not facing total annihilation plan of the Jews. Despite statements made by Romanian Chief of Staff, and even by Antonescu himself, concerning the general Jewish population in Transnistria, it appears that the actual steps taken by the Romanian authorities in the Mogilev district led to selective rather than total annihilation. This approach determined to a large degree the method adopted by the Jewish committees for coping with the Romanian authorities. The term Judenrat, Wendy just talked about it. The term Judenrat, commonly used for these Jewish officials in the ghettos, was rarely used in Transnistria. The term predominantly used was coordonare, coordinate. In full, the Jewish Committee for Coordinating Labor, as the Romanian regime expected the Jewish Committee to comply with the authorities' forced labor demands. I prefer to call the Jewish officials in the Mogilev district Jewish Committee and not Jewish Council to underline the difference. The term ghetto, as used in the Mogilev district, also had a different meaning to its common use in Poland. The Jewish quarters in the Mogilev district were not called ghettos by their inhabitants, but Lager, which is camp in German, quarter or neighborhoods. Most of them were not sealed off with barbed wire or fences, but had obvious boundaries, since they had been Jewish neighborhoods for generations. The Romanian notion that Transnistria was the focus of Romanian colonialism was also manifested in the language. The areas which Jews were settled were called colonies. Only in the fall of 1942, some of the Jewish neighborhoods were fenced, and many of the Jews who were renting houses in the Ukrainian neighborhoods were forced to move into the Jewish quarter. Only then did the Jews start using the word ghetto for the fenced Jewish neighborhood. Relationship between the chairman of the Jewish Committee and the Romanian officers were uncommon. Belneu, first Romanian prefect of the Mogilev district, allowed Siegfried Jägendorf, chairman of the Jewish Committee of the Mogilev Ghetto, to participate in the meeting of the Romanian regime and even voice his view. And it's not only about Jewish matters, it's general matters. Meir Teich, chairman of the Shargorod Ghetto Committee, was granted permission to establish a Jewish police force. And this Jewish police force of the ghetto was also responsible for Shargorod's Ukrainian non-Jewish residents. The chairman of the committees could resign from their post, and some, such as Jägendorf and Yosef Sawyer, did so, and the Romanian authorities did not harm them by way of retribution, which was common in ghettos in Eastern Europe and Poland. The Jewish committees combined a headship appointed by the ruling authorities with an authentic leadership. Dan Michman distinguishes between headship, which refers to an administrative body appointed by the ruling authority that determines its objective and selects its chief, who out of fear of an external power serve the ruler's interest. By contrast, leadership develops spontaneously. It motivates people to act of their own will and serves the interest of the group and unites it. The matter I would present now, and it was not on the paper you have read, will demonstrate the difference between headship and leadership in ghetto reality. In 1942, an appointed committee was established by the Romanian regime in the ghetto in the village of Kopaigorod in Transnistria. It was headed by Rico Cooperberg. On July 5, 1942, the commander, Major Oreshano, commanded the expulsion of all Jews of Kopaigorod to a forest some 3 miles away from the village. About 3,500 Jews were sent without food or shelter. How did the chairman of the Jewish committee respond to this order? Well, the only family not deported was that of the head of the committee, Cooperberg. Even if we overlook the result, it may be assumed that the deportation to the forest would have taken place had another persona headed the Jewish committee. It appears that this was a classic headship. Cooperberg was appointed by the Romanian authorities. His task was an external objective, and the Jews complied with the orders only from fear that the price for resistance would have been even higher. Back to the Jews expelled to the forest. They were placed in an area closed off with barbed wire, and armed Ukrainian guards were posted to watch over it. Jews who tried to escape back to the village were shot. Many died, and many fell sick. In their most difficult time, the Jews of Kopaigorod were left without leadership. A few weeks later, some of the young Jews were taken back to Kopygorod for cleaning work. Among them was Akiva Fabius Orenstein. Orenstein had never held any official position in the ghetto, yet he took advantage of the fact that he was working in Kopygorod to speak to the Romanian officer and persuaded him to bring the Jews back from the forest to the ghetto. The entire act of returning the Jews to Kopygorod was found out by the commander Oroshano only post factum, and he was persuaded to accept for a bribe. Once back in Kopygorod, a new Jewish committee was set, and Orenstein was elected to head the committee. The same event which demonstrated what a headship is now serves us in demonstrating leadership. Orenstein was not appointed by the Romanian regime, and his duty was not to meet the objective of the Romanian authorities. He grew from within the community of the Jewish deportees. This was the evolvement of a leadership which acted to meet goals it shared with the Jews of the ghetto, and only later did it receive the approval of the Romanian regime. A few words on these committee leaders in the Mogilev district ghetto. Although they operated under similar historical conditions and shared the same assumptions, the decision and conduct of committee chairmen were based on their personalities and the unique situation in each of the ghettos, and were therefore different. Siegfried Jägendorf, chairman of the Mogilev ghetto, was an entrepreneurial leader. He was granted authority for refurbishing the power station and foundry. He shaped a two-pronged power base. The Jewish public, who was dependent on these resources for its livelihood, and the Romanian authority, which viewed the power station and foundry as crucial institutions for the control of the region. Jägendorf coped with the most fundamental problem in the Mogilev district, the right of Jews to exist. To this end, he created a vital service using Jewish labor as an invaluable force for the Romanian authorities. 2,000 Jews worked at the foundry. Most of them and their family members survived. We are all familiar with the Schindler's List, but not many are familiar with Jägendorf's list. 2,000 Jews and their family members. It's about 10,000 Jews rescued by Jägendorf. Meir Teich, in the Shargorod ghetto, was a conservative leader. He chose to operate by implementing familiar practices from the time of his leadership in South Bukovina. He established committee institutions such as public kitchen and orphanage, following the same principle applied in pre-war Romania. He sought to structure an autonomous Jewish community which could support its institutions with as little external intervention as possible. In Shargorod, comes evening, a Jewish policeman would signal, and all non-Jewish officials would leave the ghetto. 75% of Teich's home Suceava Jewry survived Transnistria. The common rate for surviving a ghetto in Poland was less than 10%. Max Rosenstrauch, chairman of the Jewry ghetto, was a formalist leader. He placed great importance on carrying out every command of the Romanian authorities to the letter, proving loyalty and obedience. Any initiative that deviated from the orders and any proposals to adopt more creative methods to deal with the Romanian authorities were, in his view, deceitful and therefore dangerous. Dickmann Kunstadt, secretary of the Jewish committee at the Jewry ghetto, wrote, "Today, Prefect Naksturas asked for a list of all Ukrainian Jews in Jewry, and Rosenstrauch rushed to give him a list already that evening, and never erased a single person." And yet, this was the ghetto with highest percentage of survivors in Transnistria. The Jewish leadership had paid a heavy price. Perhaps later I'll talk about the personal price the chairman had paid. But I would like first to underline the social public price that was paid. In order to understand this price, we need to look into the Jewish society deported to the Mogilev district of Transnistria. Among the South Bukovina Jews arriving at Transnistria by train, and despite harsh conditions, there were Jews who succeeded in bringing money, jewelry, and other belongings. Property of this nature could be sold, especially items of clothing and footwear, guaranteeing its owners food and shelter and helping them to survive the first few months. By contrast, families from Bessarabia and North Bukovina arrived on foot with no property or extra food or clothing, partly because of the economic circumstances, and partly because they were robbed, raped, and murdered on their journey. The significance of the financial gaps could have been the difference between life and death. Binyamin Brechel testified. Former professors and other professions who had no connections would walk in the street of Mogilev like beggars asking for bread. On the eve of the deportation from the During Ghetto in the summer of 1942, the poorer ghetto dwellers forced the wealthier ones to open their pockets by invading their homes and refusing to leave until receiving enough money to bribe the authorities and revoke the deportation order. Lippmann Kunstadt wrote, "In Transnistria, there are Tulchin and Bug. There are forced labor camps. These are places where Jews wish they were dead. But there is also another Transnistria, where the wealthy sit day and night playing poker, and their hands are not empty." The Romanian policy of reducing the Jewish populations in the ghettos also had a financial viewpoint. On October 12, 1942, General Ion Iliescu, Transnistria Gendarmerie Inspector, suggested that the quota of 3,000 Jews for deportation to the starvation camp of Pichura be filled with the poorest. His reasoning was that they would die sooner anyhow, and that was the purpose of a death camp. Among the weak and poor had been a large group of single mothers. Those were not single mom of choice, as there was not such option then, but married women whose husbands were absent, having been recruited to the Red Army or because they had died in Transnistria. They and their children were regarded as non-productive, as they could not participate in the forced labor duties or go to the neighboring villages to look for work, as they had little children to look after. When the chairman of the Jewish leadership in the ghettos were required to dilute the population of the ghettos, they selected single mothers and young children. The different fate of the Jews of North Bukovina and Bessarabia and Jews from South Bukovina in the year prior to Germany's invasion of Russia had a clear impact on the fate of Jews in each of the provinces during the Holocaust. The Romanian ascribed significant meaning to the year 1940, when the Soviets seized the provinces of North Bukovina and Bessarabia for 1 year, and socialist and communist ideas were favorably viewed by a small part of the Jewish residents, youngsters mostly. This led the Romanians to display hostility towards Jews of North Bukovina and Bessarabia. South Bukovina, on the other hand, had remained in Romanians' control since the end of the First World War and were perceived as more Romanians. South Bukovina's Jews had several advantages in Transnistria. They came with their leaders, brought part of their assets with them, and spoke Romanian and German fluently, so they could easily communicate with the Romanian authorities. The South Bukovina Jews identified strongly with their Jewish hometown communities in Romania, and less so with the abstract community of an overall Jewish public. In testimonies of survivors, the Romanian hometown almost always appears alongside the individual's name as part of the person's identity. This local identity was so strong that in many cases, members of one community refused to assist Jews of another community. Sawyer gave an account of his experience in the Shargorod ghetto. I saw a mother asking for bread for her starving child from a Kimpulun cooperative of South Bukovina, and they refused, saying that the money was intended to help people from their hometown community and not Jews from other towns. Differences and discrimination existed not only between the various communities of deportees from Romania, but also between them and the local Ukrainian Jews. The Romanian authorities in the Mogilev district accepted this class and financial division and even encouraged them, since they allowed for a divide and rule policy and guaranteed the cooperation of the stronger communities. Kunstadt outlined the order of entitlement to life as viewed in the ghettos. The highest in the hierarchy are those from the Dorohoi province, who are absolutely kosher. They are not suspected of being Bolsheviks. Then are the South Bukovinians, who remained in the realm of the kingdom. Then come North Bukovinians, who were under Soviet occupation for a year, under the hammer and sickle. And last, the remainder of Jews from Bessarabia, who were considered red. The Romanian authorities could have implemented a random policy for reducing the Jewish population in the district ghettos without the cooperation of the Jewish committees. However, the Romanian authorities preferred a policy of selectively ridding themselves of the Jews. They would not have been able to choose the poorest or the least Romanian without the cooperation of the Jewish committees. The two main criteria of ghetto hierarchy accepted by both the Romanian authority and the Jewish leadership were, first, having a workplace in the ghetto or ability to pay for a work exemption, and second, belonging to certain hometowns communities of origin in Romania. Kunstadt wrote of a deportation plan in July 1942. Ukrainian Jews will be sent first, and then the Jews of Bessarabia and North Bukovina who enjoyed the Garden of Eden in Stalin's time. The interests of the Jewish committees and the Romanian forces in the district were coordinated. The Romanian regime was interested in selectively ridding themselves of the Jews in the ghetto. The objective of the Jewish committees at first was to save as many Jews as possible. But as conditions worsened and the danger of death became increasingly present, this ambitious goal proved to be unfeasible and was replaced by a more modest one, to save the Jews of their own hometown communities. Therefore, Mihai Danilov, head of the Jewish police in the Mogilev ghetto, focused chiefly on saving Jews from Dorohoi. Jegendorf focused on saving Jews from Radeuts, and Taich primarily assisted Jews from Suceava. The Jewish leadership operated on the basis of two premises. The first was that a reasonable possibility existed for a large part of the Jewish population in the Mogilev district ghettos to survive to the end of the war, as they were not facing a total annihilation. They believed this, and they did not know what was happening to the Jews in Poland and Eastern Europe. The leadership was no less assured of a second premise, that not all the Jews in the ghettos could be saved. Based on those two premises, the Jewish committees and their chairman decided to cooperate with the Romanian authorities even when the orders were harsh. The Jewish committees applied this strategy for 2.5 years. The greater the chances of survival of their hometown communities, the more they were willing to cooperate. The representative of the ghetto population, most of whom were from South Bukovina, felt that their communities were assessing their achievement based on their success in saving the Jews from their own communities, and that their fellow community members understood and accepted the price involved. the loss of other Jewish communities in the ghetto. This Jewish leadership was compelled to function under grave conditions. This was a community that had been removed from its homeland and culture. They had very few resources compared to the needs. They lived in crowded conditions and poor sanitation, which led to outbreaks of disease, and were under constant lurking death. Jewish committees negotiated with the Romanian regime over deportation to the starvation camps of Skazinets and Pechura and Buk camps. They exerted tremendous efforts in preventing the deportation of those close to them, such as affluent Jews or members of their hometown communities from South Bukovina, but participated in registering the Jews of North Bukovina, Bessarabia, and Ukraine, and even assisted in rounding them up. Despite the harsh conditions with which the Jewish committees coped, they did not perceive themselves as agents of the Romanian regime, but leaders of their communities. Community leaders believed that, given the circumstances under which they operated, their approach was optimal. Danilov wrote, "It was crucial that we sacrifice some people to save the other 17,000 who remained in Mogilev. Without our intervention, the entire ghetto was under risk of evacuation." Taich wrote, "We believe that this was the only way to clear the conscience of our heavy hearts." And yet, the words of Kunstadt echo to us. The committee arranged generous amounts of food and beverage with their close associates and head of the gendarmerie, and there was a celebration that the money used to pay for could have been enough for a whole week in the public kitchen. That very night, in an attic, a young man hanged himself because his wife had been nagging him for a week to get some milk for a sick toddler costing half a mark, and he could not find half a mark. Thank you.